Tell me about the book.
Okay, about the book. Let me see if I can share. Let me first see if I can get out of here and get over to where I want to share. There's the book in itself, and this is the front cover of the book. And I thought it was very powerful, and I sent it out to a lot of people. Cure PTSD Today. That's a heck of a statement. Now, I got about everybody and their brother likes this except for one person. And they said, well, the gun isn't scuffed up. Obviously, he's not seen any combat because he's not dirty. He doesn't have this. And for God's sakes, But at any rate, and then some said they didn't like the fact that the Cure PTSD was in camo. I don't mind that so much. I wish they'd use some more modern camo because what you see, this is probably it's digital camo that they've got. One person said, well, they don't wear helmets like that. Of course they do. Delta teams, SEAL teams all wear helmets like that. But at any rate, not to get lost apart, we got this book cover and we got the back cover as well. I won't go into that, but it's a really powerful set of covers. And then, so we wrote this book by accident.
Who's we?
Stephen Hunter and myself. Now Steve's got two other books in print. One is the Whiteboard Quotes. I love that book, and he kind of did that by accident as well. The one he didn't do by accident was Look for Beauty, Find Happiness, and I really enjoy that book as well. I think that's very powerful. And this book kind of stemmed off that book, kind of leveraged itself off that. So it was back. I was having all this problem in August, and my PTSD would kick in. And I was diagnosed with PTSD, 46 years ago, just like 3 years ago, but I had it for 46 years, right? Didn't know it. I just thought everybody was like that. My particular type of PTSD, I would go every 2 weeks and get depressed for no reason at all. And I mean, I could be having the best time of my life, making lots of money, having lots of friends, whatever. And I go into these depressions, and getting out of the depression would take about 3 days. And I don't care what you do, drink, whatever, it's going to take 3 days to get out of it. So anyway, I thought, I tried to Look for Beauty, Find Happiness during that time, and it worked briefly, and then it just didn't have the punch that I think I needed. And Look for Beauty, Find Happiness is really based on what they call a pattern interrupt. And Anthony Robbins has talked about this for a long, long time and has some interesting stories about pattern interrupts. And basically a pattern interrupt is like if you have an LP album. Most of us are old enough to remember when we had the big 78 or 33 RPM albums. And if you scratch one of the tracks, needle comes down and bounces over that track, and it kind of ruins the whole recording experience. And I don't think Anthony Robbins was the initiator of this particular pattern interrupt, but what he did with it was pretty astounding. He'd get somebody in that negative mode, where they're crying and unpowerful, and then he would throw water on them, a glass of water, shock them, and then he said, go ahead, you were trying to tell me something. And they get into it. He'd throw another glass of water in their face, shock them out of it. Well, what's he doing? He's creating a pattern interrupt. And the third time he did this to this particular person, she goes, it's not important to talk about that. He just kind of scratched that record track. So I got thinking, well, what if I could scratch that record track, but scratch it so many times, but more importantly, put in something that changed me to a whole new record, per se. Might that be of value? And so what I did was, and then just drop it, let it go. And what happened was the PTSD for that particular day just seemed to fall away. It came back with a rage the next day, because I was in my 3-day period cycle, did it again, and it went away. This time it never came back on the third day. And about 2 weeks later, I could start to feel it come on again. I played these stories, and it went away. And the more I did it, the longer it went away, until it just frankly disappeared. Yeah, I have not had a PTSD event. It took about 2.5 months for it to literally go away. And I waited and I waited and I waited because I didn't set out to solve anything, but this is what occurred. And at the 4.5, 5th month of, into this thing, which would be 2.5 to 3.5 months of no PTSD, guaranteed every 2 weeks, right? Nothing. Then I experienced my first real depression, and it was so mild. I go, wow. People get upset with this. This is nothing, because PTSD, symbolically said you have a monkey on your back and you got to get this thing off. How do you get this thing off your back? And so then I told Steve about what I did and how I kind of put together some of what he had, some of what Anthony Robbins had, and then scratched this record. And the result at the time was pretty astounding for me. For the first time in 46 years, I was PTSD free. And I basically did the whole thing in a day. I set it up, pulled the trigger. And then, like our famous shampoo story about a guy, I think it was in the 20s or 30s, you know the story well, the people that are listening may not. He was hired by a shampoo company to increase their sales. So he just sat in his office looking at this, and they said, well, what are you going to do? And he goes, where do we have this bottled at? And he went to the bottler. And he says, I want to add one line to the shampoo and the instruction line. And it says, lather, wet your hair, lather, and rinse is what they said. And he added the one word, and repeat. And he doubled the sales of shampoo because they're using it twice as fast. So by using these stories, I'm hammering away. I rinsed and repeated 10 times, so to speak, of really interesting stories. One of the stories, it doesn't have to be always about you, for sure. It can be, like I say, events that make you feel good. But Steve Hunter climbed Mount Shasta when he wasn't expecting to, with an ice pick and everything else. And sometimes, and you well know, you're my medical advocate, I can hardly move. And in some cases, I just am at my end. And I think of Steve Hunter climbing that Mount Shasta and continuing up there all the way to the peak. And I got a picture of him up there. And I said, if he can just do that by accident, so to speak, I can get up and move. Come on, get up and move. And so that's part of one of my stories. This is something that somebody else inspired me to be, which is a good thing. But basically this technique, I designed it in one day and then executed it, pulled the trigger. And so when I told Steve about this, and he says, how's this work? And so I'm telling him about it. So he tries it, and he gets some result, and I sample it around a little bit, and people are getting some interesting results. And I said to Steve, I said, you know what? We need to write a book about this stuff. I said, even if we can only help 10% of people with PTSD, that would be worthwhile, even just 10%. I think the rate's going to be much higher than that, but let's just say 10%. That's good. That's a good thing. So off we went to write the thing. He wrote his sections, I wrote my sections, and we finally got it done. We got it to the editor. They edited it, and then we're going to have it up on Amazon for a Kindle download. We're going to have an audio book. We're going to end up with a video book as well. We've got a new website, which you'll see up on the screen here in a minute, cureptsdtoday.com. And I still have yet to put that all up too. But the results have been fairly interesting that we sampled things out. And we wrote one chapter specifically, if you don't read anything else, chapter number 1 says, just do this. And it encapsulates everything they've got to do. Then we combined a workbook in there so we can help them design the stories that they want, their ads, their stories, 10 of them. I suggested 10, I guess, because it's digital. I don't know. It could be less than that for some people. We don't know yet. But so it's been a very interesting ride, to say the least. And I found out something I really can't do well is read on video. Boy, it's tough. things like this, I can ad-lib all day long. A lot of people can't do what we do, but to read something, like in front of the class. Remember how hard that was when we were kids to stand up and read something?
Yeah, well, because number they weren't your words, number
Right,
one.
and you're not familiar with them.
No, and they used words that didn't make sense to me or weren't in the
Right.
right sequence
Right.
because of a writing style. And yeah, I used to trip up all the time.
Yeah, so I thank gosh for editing. So I've been almost 4 days of reading this book, chapter by chapter, and now I think as of this morning I'm able to start the editing process itself, video editing process. And I found out, I thought I was so smart, Frank. I'd have one software crunching the video, and I'd go over and record video under another one. And it turned out I didn't have enough speed in my computer. So when I went look back at what I read, what the hell is that? And apparently it couldn't sample the audio quick enough. So I had to do those all over this morning. But
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Who is this? Is this book for? Is this book strictly for military personnel who are suffering from PTSD? Which is what everybody, when you say PTSD, you think of military.
Yeah, you do. And the answer is no. We believe, and I've been in contact with a bunch of these organizations already, but it can be for police, fire, ambulance, first responders. They see a mess of stuff that they could get traumatized. ER workers, same thing, any place. And it's interesting that, women get it a lot, actually more than men do, which was a surprising number. And I've got, let me go find that one section. Let me show you, let me read to you or show you or whatever we're going to do here about. So I had to do a lot of research, on this topic to get smart about it and see what I forgot. But it says here, in this section here is who can suffer from it, right? And the first one is the military service, like you just said. The experience of combat is a significant risk factor for the development of PTSD, as in veterans. Almost 31% of the Vietnam veterans have PTSD. 10% of the Gulf War veterans do, 11% of the veterans of Afghanistan, and 20% Iraqis. And then we have police, officers, firefighters, first responders, other healthcare professionals like I talked about, ER, photojournalists. I was taken back by this one, and war correspondents as well. And then as I got to reading more, it turned out that a lot of women carry PTSD from being molested and or worse. And children even can carry the PTSD, and there's a whole list of things down here of symptoms of children PTSD if they're treated horribly by their parents or some part of their family. And this goes all the way down to 6 years old, wetting the bed after learning, even after learning how to use a toilet. Number 2, during playtime, they can act out scary events. Number 3, unusually being very clingy with a parent. Number 4, being able to talk when they have been talking before, but they just stopped talking, which brings up that whole the Patriot movie with Mel Gibson in it with his little daughter that won't talk. And then avoidance of anything new to them, including a new social situation. But I was really taken back by the number. And I think, let's see if I have it down here. Excuse me for not having this all queued up for us here. Here are some factors that are interesting and how increase the chances of getting PTSD is in the book. But there's also resiliency things I found too. So anyway, but the fact that women get it from being raised, in a abusive home per se, and they carry it with them and they don't even know it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a mind blower. The 3 types of treatment are, one is cognitive therapy, which is 20, 90-minute sessions. Then there's an eye movement therapy. Then there's pharmacological therapies, drug you up. And then there's now us, a fourth option for these people. What do you have to lose? I'm going to quote Trump. What do you have to lose? If this can work for you, you're done. That's it. Finito. Nada más. And that's my hope. And almost everybody I know knows somebody that has PTSD that can read this book, and they don't have to read the whole book. Take the first chapter, read this. Now, they're going to be so interested in it, I think they're going to use the workbook section, which is right behind that. So we tried very carefully to provide tools inside the book for them to develop their 10 stories. And so I'm building a little bit of an organization because I can't be the only person running around the nation talking about this stuff. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 veterans lined up to go talk in different parts of the world about this. We're going to be talking to the VFWs, DAV. I have a police chaplain connected to a police chaplains organization. Talking to them about maybe them pushing it out for the police. Yeah, so it should have a lot of legs. It's almost one of those things that everybody eats food, and I make food. Like the Defenders, my self-defense tool, not everybody's into self-defense. They don't care. They don't need it. But almost everybody knows somebody that has some PTSD running on them. And by the way, I'm going to go out on a limb with this one. I believe that PTSD is part of our DNA. And when we were cavemen and women, and that saber-toothed tiger comes up and it scares the bejesus out of us, we get paranoid about the smell, the end result of death, and our protective survival mechanism that exists in us goes into overtime on some of these things. It gets hypersensitive, and thus you suffer from this PTSD thing. But it's part of our DNA survival. It isn't that you just got lucky enough to catch some disease. No, it's inside all of us waiting to pop out. So all we have to do is detune that a little bit, and we're good to go. We still have the fight or flight. We still can survive, but it just doesn't have to be to this radical end.
So, wow, my voice, excuse me, anybody who's had a traumatic experience at any age could be suffering from PTSD.
Could be, absolutely.
And most likely is suffering.
Hard to know that one. I won't go so far out on that limb, but
maybe.
It may be. Yeah. I mean, you run in, I even ran into one martial artist that during our tests, they were complaining, because I have tests 2-3 times a year, used to then. And they're 7-day tests, so they weren't getting enough food. So I went on this campaign for the next test to find out what they liked and what they didn't like. And I provided everything they didn't like and to eat. And one guy just had, we had a game, like a board game like Monopoly, and he ended up on the square of he get a chance to eat something. And his whole thing was sauerkraut. And he didn't like sauerkraut. And I guess he was forced to eat it at one time, and texture version of it, and he was going to puke on the mat. And I said, "Don't you dare puke on my mat." So he took his hat off and puked in his hat and then put it back on his head and kept on going. But there, I think even, when we were kids, finish your plate, right? And there was stuff on that plate you had to choke down, as silly as that may sound, those PTSD experiences can lead into life that you'll never touch anything that looks or smells anything like that. When in fact, it was a misjudgment as a survival mechanism as a child, overdriven by emotion. But so there you go.
So when will this book be available?
Oh gosh, I don't know. That's not the right answer.
Are we talking a week, a month, half a year?
Probably within a week.
7 days, really?
Yeah, well, we've been at this for a while. And we finally got the finished copy out of the editors, and that gave us the ability to have PDF right away. But we're going to get it into a Kindle format, and then, like I say, I'm reading it for, and Steve read his sections, I read my section, so we can have a video version of it, because a lot of people don't want to read. They'd like to watch. So basically, they see us, the authors, reading our sections. and I annotated some of mine. I went off script, off the reservation, so to speak, and would add some extra stuff to it, which I think is fun. That's cool. Instead of just being so dry as to read one thing, you can kind of annotate, well, this is how this kind of got started. A little history lesson in there. And then I've got to finish the website. I've got, I think, one page up there. Gorgeous, mind you, but nonetheless, we're going to be offering workshops, live workshops. We're going to be doing live Zoom work with particular people if they want us to help them design their stories. We're not psychologists. We're not, we have degrees, so that's not an issue, but we're teaching them how to build the stuff we know how to build. And but we're going to have all of that. And I can see us doing guest lectures and, all these various organizations, the VA even, and then the DAV and the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and, they can all use it. We'll have to wait and see. So we're going to have some over on Amazon, some over on our own side. Matter of fact, this podcast is going to go over on PTSDtoday.com. And I had one of my guys, he's been with me for like 30 years, a super duper not Vietnam veteran, but Gulf War and all the way up to include Afghanistan. And he texts me, he says, "Hey, Sensei," that would be me. I love you like a brother, and you've never steered me wrong, but you really mean you can cure PTSD in one day? How do you do that? And so I got him on the phone and explained to him, but I said, first off, I'll explain it to you, but you got to buy a book. I'm a capitalist. Come on. Otherwise, if you give something away for free, it has no value to it. You know that.
Right.
And so he got really enthused by it, and he goes, "You know what?" He said, "They're trying to do stuff like this, but in a singular mode, not like you're hammering it." And he's gone through everything cognitive. He's been in PTSD treatment for 10 years or 8 years, I think. And he got really excited over this. So we'll see what it does for him, and kind of go from there.